Cannabis has been branded a vice, a distraction, a drug that obscures perception and stifles ambition. But that's a fragment of the story, a distorted image that has hidden a deeper truth for far too long. Before prohibition, it was sacred. Before criminalization, it was ceremonial. It wasn't employed to escape life, but to comprehend it. In ancient cultures, cannabis was revered not for the sensations it produced, but for the insights it unveiled. It was not entertainment. It was a mirror, a teacher, a gateway. So why was this revered plant transformed into a symbol of laziness and rebellion? Why was the connection between altered states and spiritual evolution severed? Because self-awareness is a powerful force. It shifts your gaze from external validation to internal truth. You cease seeking answers in institutions constructed by others and begin discovering them within yourself. Such freedom defies taxation, domestication, and control. Long before laws, borders, and governments laid claim to consciousness, cannabis was a bridge, a spiritual instrument, a sacred guide. Ancient civilizations didn't merely stumble upon this plant and decide to smoke it for amusement. They recognized something profound, something ancient, something wise. Across cultures and continents, from the Himalayan peaks to the North African deserts, cannabis was recognized not as a means of escaping reality, but as a key to unlocking its deeper mysteries. The Sadhus of India didn't use cannabis to disconnect from the world. They employed it to dive deeper into it. Through bhang, a sacred cannabis preparation, they communed with Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation, not for the sake of chaos, but to dismantle the illusions of ego, attachment, and the false self. They were not mere recreational users, they were mystics, and the plant was not a pastime, but a sacrament. In ancient China, Taoist shamans burned hemp in rituals to alter perception and access spiritual dimensions. In Scythian burial chambers, archaeologists have discovered traces of burned cannabis, offerings to the gods or tools to guide the deceased into the afterlife. In the Middle East, ancient Hebrew texts mention kane bosom, a plant many scholars believe was cannabis, used in the holy anointing oil described in the book of Exodus. This was not accidental. It was not metaphorical. The plant was interwoven into the very rituals that connected humanity to the divine. In Zoroastrian Persia, within Egyptian priesthoods, and among Central Asian tribes, cannabis formed part of the sacred toolkit. It was revered as a plant of insight, a botanical bridge between the material and the metaphysical. The Vedic texts of India spoke of soma, a mysterious substance used by seers to access divine knowledge. While the exact ingredients of soma are debated, many believe cannabis was among them, alongside other entheogenic plants. The pattern is unmistakable. Across diverse belief systems, people turn to cannabis not to dull their senses, but to heighten them. This was not primitive drug use. It was elevated consciousness, and it wasn't reserved for elites. It was accessible to anyone brave enough to confront their own mind. But then empires arose, along with industrialists and missionaries, and with them came a new agenda: obedience, control, and monotheism. The ancient gods were silenced, as were the tools that facilitated communion with them. Cannabis was driven from temples into the shadows. What was once sacred became sinful, and the narrative shifted. Not because the plant had changed, but because power structures feared what it could awaken within individuals. They understood its potential. They knew it broadened perception, challenged authority, and dissolved the illusion of separation. They recognized that those who connected with the divine through direct experience had no need for intermediaries, institutions, or systems built on fear, and that was the crux of the issue. There are truths that remain unspoken, buried too deeply, too potent for mainstream platforms. That's precisely why we developed Inner Sanctum, our exclusive community where we delve deeper than ever before. Join us via the link below and receive a complimentary digital guide to unlocking your inner potential, but only for a limited time, because the reality is this: cannabis didn't simply fall from grace, it was actively pushed. And the so-called war on drugs was, in essence, a war on inner freedom. The experience couldn't be controlled, so it was criminalized. Awakening couldn't be monetized, so it was pathologized. And here we stand, generations later, striving to piece together what was taken from us, attempting to recall what they worked diligently to make us forget. But your presence here signifies that the remembering has already begun. You've been told it was about public safety, about health, about morality, about protecting the youth, but that isn't the true reason cannabis was outlawed. That's the narrative they disseminated to keep you compliant. The truth is that the war on cannabis was always about your consciousness, because a mind that questions, reflects, feels deeply, and sees clearly is difficult to manage, and that terrified those in power. When governments outlawed cannabis, it wasn't due to the discovery of newfound dangers. It was because they recognized a threat, not to the public, but to their own authority. In the early 20th century, Western powers began suppressing plant medicines across the board, not only cannabis, but also peyote, psilocybin, ayahuasca. Anything that opened the mind and softened the ego was suddenly illegal. This timing was not coincidental. It was an era of industrial expansion, mass propaganda, centralized education, and a growing need for obedient, uniform workers. There was no room for spiritual introspection or expanded states of awareness in that model. There was only room for submission. Cannabis, with its ability to slow down time, focus your attention inward, and stimulate contemplation, was everything they sought to suppress. Because what transpires when you cease rushing, cease pursuing superficial goals, external validation, and manufactured desires? Clarity dawns. You begin to pose questions they cannot afford to answer, such as, why do I feel empty within a system that provides everything it claims I should want? Why do I feel disconnected in a world that boasts unprecedented levels of connection? Why do I crave silence, solitude, something deeper? And why does that feel so forbidden? The answer lies in this. A spiritually awakened population does not serve the interests of a select few. You can't sell salvation to someone who has already discovered it within. You can't manipulate a soul that remembers its inherent sovereignty, and you certainly can't control free thinkers who have tasted ego death. So they constructed a new narrative. In the United States, figures like Harry Anslinger weaponized cannabis along racial lines. Propaganda films such as Reefer Madness did more than simply misinform. They dehumanized. They associated the plant with minorities, crime, and deviancy, not because it was truthful, but because it served the agenda of fear. And where fear reigns supreme, truth is suffocated. What was once a divine connector became a social weapon. Decades of discriminatory policies followed, leading to mass incarceration, fractured families, erased traditions, and millions imprisoned for a plant. Yet few paused to inquire, who truly benefits from this? It wasn't about safeguarding society, it was about preserving an illusion. Because when direct spiritual experience is suppressed, people are forced to rely on institutions, religious, political, medical, for guidance, meaning, and control. They couldn't eradicate the plant, so they vilified it. They couldn't criminalize introspection, so they demonized the tools that facilitated it. But deep down, they knew the truth, and some still do. The fear wasn't cannabis itself. The fear was what cannabis revealed, that the gateway to liberation resides within you, and they possess no key to it. So they locked you out, they enacted laws, they saturated the media. They conditioned you to believe that spiritual tools were criminal tools, and their campaign was so successful that even now, even as laws are slowly changing, the stigma lingers like smoke, not because it's factual, but because it's effective. But you were never the problem. Your mind wasn't dangerous. Your awareness wasn't deviant. What frightened them was your potential, unfiltered, unplugged, and untethered. And no system built on control can withstand that. Most people perceive cannabis in terms of its immediate effects, feeling stoned, relaxed, or paranoid. But that's superficial thinking, the type of thinking the system encourages to keep you trapped, because once you comprehend that cannabis doesn't simply give you something, but it shows you something, you realize it's not merely a chemical experience. It's a consciousness experience, a mirror, a magnifier, a portal, not to escape the world, but to see it clearly, raw, unfiltered. However, the true magic doesn't stem solely from the plant. It arises from how you engage with it. When you approach cannabis with reverence, it doesn't just alter your mood, it transforms your relationship with yourself. It pulls you into the present moment with an undeniable force. Mundane thoughts begin to dissolve, and a different kind of awareness emerges. You start to notice the spaces between your thoughts. You begin to perceive silence as if it were speaking. Distractions fade, and what remains is something most people avoid: yourself, not the persona you project to others, but the deeper self, the authentic self, the unresolved self. And that's precisely why cannabis can be so unsettling. Because when used intentionally, it doesn't numb, it reveals. It exposes areas where you're misaligned, where you're performing instead of being, where you're suppressing instead of feeling. You might experience anxiety, not because the plant caused it, but because it unveiled the anxiety you've been carrying beneath the surface all along. That's the power of sacred use. It doesn't always feel pleasant, but it invariably speaks the truth. It can dismantle the ego, not to destroy it, but to help you understand how it operates. The narratives you tell yourself, the labels you cling to, the identities you've constructed around survival rather than authenticity. The plant gently sits you down and says, "Look." And if you're brave enough to look, you can begin rewriting your narrative, not through force, not through intellect, but through presence. Many spiritual traditions speak of ego death, of surrender, of dropping into the now. Cannabis, when combined with practices such as breathwork, meditation, or even mindful movement, can serve as a guide into those states. But it's not the destination itself. It's the lantern illuminating the path. You must still traverse it yourself. When you enter that space with intention, everything is transformed. Light becomes more vibrant, sound becomes more resonant. Your body becomes a tuning fork, and your thoughts slow sufficiently to allow you to truly listen. That's where insight originates. Not from striving harder, but from softening, surrendering, and allowing. And yet, most people never attain this state because they treat cannabis as entertainment rather than ceremony. They pursue the high but overlook the teaching. They turn it on to tune out, not to tune in. The distinction is subtle but transformative. One dulls the mind, the other awakens it. The plant doesn't cater to your desires. It reflects what you bring to the experience. Approach it with intention, and you receive revelation. Approach it with distraction, and you encounter confusion. That's why setting and mindset are crucial. If you use cannabis surrounded by screens, stimulation, and distractions, don't be surprised if it simply amplifies the chaos. But if you meet it in stillness, in silence, in reverence, it becomes sacred once more. This is what the ancients understood. They didn't use cannabis daily. They didn't use it casually. They used it in specific moments with clear purpose, to break through the fog of illusion and remember who they truly were, not to escape life, but to return to it more present, more grounded, more connected to the pulse beneath the noise. That's the invitation cannabis extends when you approach it with consciousness, not to become lost, but to find yourself. And the deeper you venture, the more you recognize that it's not about the plant, it's about the presence it awakens. Cannabis can serve as a key, but like any key, it can also become a cage, and that's the aspect that many avoid. It's tempting to romanticize the plant, to elevate it and declare it holy, but truthfully, not everyone uses it to awaken. Many use it to hide, to numb, to evade the very work the plant is intended to support. And that's the danger, not inherent in the plant itself, but in the intention behind its use. A sacred tool employed unconsciously becomes a trap. A medicine transformed into a habit becomes poison. You've likely witnessed it. The individual who consumes cannabis daily but hasn't progressed in years, who speaks of awareness but avoids self-reflection, who gets high to escape anxiety rather than listening to what that anxiety is trying to communicate. When cannabis becomes a default rather than a conscious choice, something shifts. The ritual becomes routine, insight becomes inertia, and the user becomes a prisoner to the same patterns they once sought to break free from. This isn't judgment, it's a reminder, because the system benefits from you using the plant in this manner. The same forces that once criminalized cannabis are now capitalizing on it, packaging it, branding it, stripping it of its spiritual essence and selling it back as a lifestyle. Not a sacrament, not a ceremony, but a commodity, another consumable in a world addicted to escape. They don't object to your use of cannabis as long as it doesn't lead to awakening. They'll offer you edibles, vapes, gummies, and dazzling dispensaries. They'll provide dopamine hits in sleek packaging, tailored for your comfort, but what they won't provide is context. They won't inform you that cannabis is a mirror, not a mask, that its purpose was never to help you avoid your pain, but to navigate through it, that it can amplify unresolved emotions and unprocessed trauma, not to punish you, but to reveal the work that remains to be done. When used carelessly, Cannabis can reinforce illusions rather than shattering them. It can make spiritual language sound profound while your actual life remains unchanged. It can create the illusion of progress without genuine transformation, a false sense of peace, a synthetic kind of presence, and the longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between insight and sedation. That's the delicate balance we must maintain between reverence and responsibility, between use and misuse. Cannabis will meet you where you are. It doesn't discriminate, but it also doesn't deceive. If you use it to bypass your inner work, you'll feel stagnant. If you use it to deepen that work, you'll feel drawn toward clarity. It's not about quantity, it's about quality, it's about consciousness. The reality is that any tool, regardless of how sacred, can become a distraction when its underlying intention is lost. And in today's world, where burnout is pervasive and silence feels foreign, it's tempting to turn to cannabis not for revelation, but for relief. But relief is temporary. Awakening is permanent. And cannabis was never intended to be a shortcut to enlightenment. It was intended to be a companion on the path, not the path itself. We must cease pretending that the plant will perform the work for us. It will not. It can reveal the doorway, but we must still step through it. It can amplify the truth, but it cannot force us to live it. That's our responsibility. That's the distinction between using the plant and being used by it. So inquire honestly. Am I using this to connect, to escape, to grow, to drift, to see, to blur the edges of what I already know is yearning to be acknowledged? The plant doesn't judge, but it also doesn't rescue. It reflects. And sometimes that reflection is precisely what we require if we are willing to look. A shift is underway. You can sense it, even if you can't articulate it precisely. A restlessness, a yearning, a quiet refusal to continue dwelling in shallow waters. The world is saturated with distractions, yet more individuals than ever are turning inward, not outward. And accompanying this shift is the resurgence of something ancient, something once buried beneath propaganda and fear. The sacred use of cannabis, not as an act of rebellion, not as a fleeting trend, but as an act of remembering. Spiritual seekers across the globe are returning to the plant, not to escape life, but to engage with it more authentically. We've entered an era where breathwork, meditation, fasting, sound healing, and plant medicines are no longer fringe practices. They are becoming essential tools for navigating a collapsing culture, and cannabis, once demonized and dismissed, is finding its way back into the core of spiritual practice. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about necessity. Because the narrative we've been fed about reality is crumbling. Systems are failing, institutions are losing credibility. The old paradigms of finding meaning through status, consumption, and blind faith no longer satiate the soul, and in that emptiness, many are awakening to an ancient truth. That direct experience is the most sacred teacher. And for countless individuals, cannabis is becoming an integral part of that experience. When used consciously, cannabis isn't a detour from the spiritual path. It's a catalyst for it. In small doses, it can quiet the incessant chatter of the thinking mind, allowing something deeper to surface. It can loosen the grip of identity, soften the armor around the heart, and unlock doors you never knew existed. It won't drag you through them, but it will reveal what is possible. And when combined with intention, meditation, stillness, mindful movement, or prayer, it transforms into something more than a mere plant. It becomes a guide. This isn't theoretical. Across the globe, conscious communities are forming around the intentional use of cannabis, microdosing for meditation, cannabis-enhanced yoga, and ceremonial circles where the plant is used with prayer and presence, not performance. These aren't simply seeking an elevated high, they are reclaiming an ancient practice with modern awareness. We're witnessing a transition from quantity to quality, from intoxication to exploration, from coping to connecting, because people are recognizing what cannabis was always intended to be: a tool, not a lifestyle, a doorway, not a destination. And with that shift comes responsibility, because as the plant re-enters sacred space, it must be met with sacred intention, not dogma, not rigid rules, but awareness. The objective isn't merely to get high, it's to gain clarity, and sometimes clarity can be uncomfortable. Sometimes it entails confronting the aspects we've buried beneath layers of noise and busyness, but if we allow it, cannabis can help bring those aspects into the light. This is the essence of this resurgence, spiritual sovereignty and not liberal policies or trendy dispensaries. Individuals yearn to reclaim their inner worlds. They seek tools that guide them home, not draw them further into distraction. And cannabis, when remembered and respected, is one such tool. It's not about reverting to the past. It's about connecting ancient wisdom with modern rediscovery. Ancient knowledge isn't lost, it's dormant, and cannabis, like other sacred plants, signals the commencement of awakening, not because the plant has changed, but because we have. We're no longer seeking to escape the world, we're seeking to rebuild it from the inside out, and if the system fears this, so be it. Because a society founded on inner knowing, profound connection, and spiritual clarity cannot be manipulated in the same manner. It can't be persuaded by the same falsehoods. It doesn't operate on fear, it operates on truth. There's a reason they seek to keep you numb, a reason they promote distraction, entertainment, and endless scrolling while suppressing anything that leads you inward, because when you're disconnected from yourself, you're easily guided, shaped, and marketed to. Someone who hasn't encountered their inner truth will chase any external truth that is sufficiently loud, and that's precisely how the system prefers it. Noise over knowing, consumption over connection. It's not solely about cannabis, it's about anything that offers a glimpse beyond the veil. Anything that threatens to dissolve the illusion of separation between self and spirit, human and divine, thought and awareness, becomes a threat to control. That's why for decades they didn't just criminalize cannabis, they erased its spiritual roots. They eliminated it from ceremony, mocked it in the media, and linked it with laziness and failure, not because it was weak, but because it was powerful. They comprehend that when individuals begin to tune in rather than tune out, things shift. Priorities change, obedience wanes. People begin to perceive the artificiality of the world around them. And worst of all, they cease adhering to the established rules because rules only function when you believe the game is real. But what occurs when the game itself is revealed as a distraction? What occurs when individuals realize that the pursuit of approval, status, and external success is hollow? That's when systems collapse, not through violence, but through disinterest, through refusal, through people choosing presence over programming. This is why the war on inner experience is so effective and so insidious, because it's subtle. You weren't explicitly told not to feel, you were simply perpetually distracted from doing so. You weren't instructed to avoid silence, they simply made it nearly impossible to find. The attack is no longer overt, it's ambient. You're surrounded by stimulation, tempted by endless dopamine hits, and praised for being busy, plugged in, and distracted, and when you attempt to reconnect, you're labeled lazy, unproductive, and indulgent. But here's the truth they conceal. The more detached you are from your inner world, the more valuable you become to theirs. A spiritually disoriented population is a marketer's dream. It's a voter's goldmine. It's the bedrock of a culture that profits from your discontent. If they can keep you chasing validation, success, and even wellness, they don't need to concern themselves with you awakening. And that's why cannabis is dangerous. Not because of its chemical composition, but because of its potential to break the cycle, to slow you down, to crack open the shell you didn't realize you were inhabiting. When used with presence, it invites you to feel again, to remember what stillness sounds like, what your body truly needs, and what your soul has been whispering beneath the noise. An individual who reconnects with themselves becomes unpredictable. They cease needing the system in the same manner. They don't consume to fill the void. They question why the void existed in the first place. And that's the genuine threat, not rebellion, not revolution, but radical reconnection. You weren't born disconnected. You were taught to be, taught that silence is empty, that rest is weakness, that slowing down is perilous. But the danger never resided in stillness. It resided in what stillness reveals, because once you perceive the game for what it is, you can't unsee it. You stop chasing, you start creating, and the systems built on your obedience begin to lose their grip. Cannabis, when used intentionally, empowers individuals to awaken, and that is precisely what they fear the most. Most people never learn how to use cannabis effectively because they've never been taught to view it as anything more than a recreational substance. Light it up, zone out, laugh, sleep. That's what is depicted in films, memes, and the surrounding culture. But when something possesses the capacity to open your perception, dissolve your ego, and bring you face to face with your subconscious. It warrants more than a casual approach. It warrants respect. It warrants ritual. Without intention, cannabis is merely another high, but with it, the plant transforms into something entirely different. A tool for transformation, a bridge, a portal. The process commences before you even take the first breath. Ask yourself, why am I using this? Not as a rhetorical question, but as an anchor. Are you seeking to numb something, to amplify something, to receive something, to release something? Intention is what distinguishes medicine from addiction, insight from confusion, and the plant discerns the difference. Ritual doesn't necessitate religious affiliation, it simply requires consciousness. Minimize distractions, prepare the space. Silence the noise that demands your attention throughout the day. This isn't solely about candles and incense, although they can be beneficial. It's about energy, clarity, and choosing to treat the moment as sacred rather than as a means of passing time. Whether you're alone in your room or beneath the stars, make it clear, this isn't about escape, it's about remembering. Once the space is clear, so are you. The first inhale becomes an invitation, the exhale, a release. You're not merely getting high, you're getting present. You're shifting from doing to being. You begin to feel your body more fully, the heaviness in your chest, the tension in your jaw, the emotions you didn't realize were lurking just beneath your awareness. Allow them to surface. That's part of the process. At times, cannabis will stir things up before it settles you down. That's not an error. That's the wisdom of the plant revealing what you've been ignoring. The discomfort, the thoughts you typically drown out with noise or routine, they rise to the surface now, not to harm you, but to facilitate your healing, but only if you're willing to feel them. Integrate the experience with meditation. Sit in stillness and observe. Use breathwork to dive deeper. Journal about what arises, thoughts, insights, memories, fears. Allow the plant to illuminate the areas you've neglected. Let it guide you not toward answers, but toward more meaningful questions. Movement is also beneficial, not the type you perform for others, but the type that reconnects you with your body. Stretch, dance, walk in nature, and feel your skin, your breath, and your weight in the world. This is embodiment. Cannabis, when used with awareness, grounds you in the present moment, not to allow you to drift away, but to enable you to land more fully in yourself. You'll recognize the difference. You'll feel it. There's a certain depth, a sacred weight, when cannabis is used in this manner. The experience becomes less about chasing a sensation and more about returning to a truth you remember, that everything you need isn't external, it already resides within you, and the plant has simply amplified the volume sufficiently for you to hear it. Once the experience concludes, the work isn't finished. That's when the integration process begins. The insights are inconsequential unless they are lived. The clarity diminishes unless it's acted upon. That's what differentiates sacred use from spiritual entertainment. Too many pursue peak states without any intention of transforming their lives afterward, but the true gift of cannabis lies not in what transpires during the session. It lies in what it reveals about what is possible in every subsequent moment. So, the next time you feel the urge, don't reach for a high, reach for a ritual. Don't seek escape, seek expansion, because cannabis isn't intended to fix you. It's intended to reveal you, and that is more potent than any high could ever be. If you've ever pondered why a simple plant could incite so much fear, so much outrage, and lead to generations of punishment, the answer lies deeper than law or policy. It lies in power, specifically, who is granted the authority to control your connection to the divine. Organized religion, despite its beauty and history, has often positioned itself as the gatekeeper between you and the sacred. It proclaims, "We possess the truth, follow us, obey this, worship that." But cannabis, when used with reverence, undermines this entire structure with a single breath, because it reminds you that God, Source, Spirit, the universe, whatever name you choose, isn't found within a building. It's found within yourself. That kind of inner access is a threat to institutions built on hierarchy. If you don't require a priest to access God, you don't require a middleman. You don't require sermons, rituals you don't comprehend, or doctrines that shame your humanity. You don't need to be told you're broken. You remember that you're whole, and at that moment the structure begins to crumble, not through violence, not through protest, but through irrelevance. Cannabis doesn't demand your faith. It reveals it to you, not always through visions or miracles, but through silence, awareness, and presence. It aids in extracting you from the noise long enough to perceive the divine in your breath, in your heartbeat, and in the space between your thoughts. It doesn't offer commandments. It offers clarity, not rules, but realization. And that's precisely why it was never merely banned. It was exiled. Throughout history, those in positions of authority have always feared what they couldn't regulate. Direct spiritual experience is unpredictable. It can't be taxed. It can't be centralized. It can't be contained within a holy book or stamped with approval. So they excluded it. They made it taboo. They shrouded it in fear, and gradually people forgot that there was a time when connection didn't require permission, but now that remembering is resurfacing, not through rebellion, but through reconnection. Cannabis is being reclaimed, not as a threat to faith, but as a path back to it. A path that doesn't rely on dogma or punishment, but on presence, that doesn't ask you to kneel in guilt, but to rise in awareness. This doesn't imply that religion is without merit. It implies that it's no longer the sole path. It signifies that the monopoly on meaning is dissolving, and that's a truth every seeker deserves to know. That awakening isn't a membership for which you pay, but a process you honor from within. For generations, cannabis has resided on the margins, misunderstood, feared, mocked, but throughout that time it was still whispering, still awaiting those prepared to remember not just the plant's truth, but their own, that the sacred isn't a distant promise. It's a present moment, and cannabis, when used with integrity, assists you in fully embracing that moment. Therefore, ask yourself, why was a plant that grows freely from the earth made illegal, while so many things that erode your spirit are sold without question? Why is something that can draw you closer to truth treated as a danger, while systems that numb, suppress, and control are deemed civilized? This isn't accidental, it's intentional. Because disempowered individuals are easy to lead, but spiritually sovereign individuals lead themselves. You were never meant to fear your own mind, you were meant to explore it. And now the tools that once belonged to sages, mystics, and rebels are being returned to your hands, not to replicate the past, but to transcend it. You were never intended to discover this path. That was the plan from the outset. They offered you dogma in place of direction, stimulation in place of stillness, and a curated life of superficial pleasures so that you would forget the raw, sacred depth of your own presence. Cannabis was never the enemy. It was the evidence, proof that there was a hidden doorway within you all along, a quiet rebellion that didn't require banners or slogans, just breath, awareness, and a spark of intention. What they feared most wasn't the plant. It was what you might become if you remembered how to use it, not for distraction, not for numbness, but as a mirror, as a teacher, as a companion on the inward journey. Because when you return to that inner sanctuary, you no longer require them in the same capacity. Their systems lose their grip. Their narratives begin to unravel. Their version of truth no longer holds your allegiance. That's the essence of spiritual sovereignty, not isolation, but wholeness, not control, but connection. You don't require permission to experience the sacred. You don't require a title, a role, or a script. You simply require presence, and cannabis, when honored rather than consumed, assists you in attaining it. It quiets the noise. It raises the frequency. It softens the layers you've erected between your true self and the version of yourself the world rewards. However, the truth is this: none of this is effective unless you're prepared to fully show up. You can use the plant without ever truly encountering yourself. You can chase the sensations and miss the message. That's why this path isn't about indulgence. It's about responsibility, about knowing when to delve deeper and when to step back, about choosing presence over performance. And this isn't solely about you. It's about the ripple effect, about the individuals you'll influence when you live from a place of truth, about the clarity you bring to your relationships, your work, and your creations, because when you're rooted in your own awareness, you become a mirror as well. You reflect back to others what they've forgotten within themselves, and that's how it spreads. Not through rebellion, but through remembrance. The old world operates on sleepwalkers, on individuals too distracted to notice their own chains. But the new world is being constructed by those who are awake, who choose depth over distraction and clarity over convenience. And in that world, cannabis doesn't reside on the periphery. It resides at the center, not as an idol, but as an ally. You were never meant to feel disconnected, disembodied, or disempowered. You were meant to experience it all, to navigate through the darkness, to remember your light, and to live in a way that renders every moment sacred once again. The question isn't whether cannabis is spiritual. The question is whether you are prepared to reclaim the facets of your spirit that were silenced, the facets that remember how to listen, how to feel, and how to awaken. And if you are still reading, you already know the answer. So let this not be the end of your journey. Join Inner Sanctum via the link below. Receive your complimentary digital guide to unlocking your inner potential, and delve deeper into the knowledge we cannot publicly share. There's more awaiting you, and it's too significant to overlook. If this exploration resonated with you, let us know through a comment. So, to bring it all together, the heart of this message is about remembering that within each of us lies the power to connect, to heal, and to awaken. Cannabis, approached with reverence and intention, can be a powerful tool on that journey, a mirror reflecting our inner landscape and a guide illuminating our path. It's about reclaiming our spiritual sovereignty, not through rebellion, but through reconnection with ourselves, with the divine, and with the world around us. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What resonated most with you? Do you have any experiences or perspectives you'd like to share? Leave a comment below, ask a question, or just join the conversation. We're building a community here, and your voice matters. And if you found this exploration insightful and want to delve deeper into these topics, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. We have so much more to explore together. Until next time, keep remembering, keep connecting, and keep awakening.